The story of my stepsister bringing her CEO boyfriend home to meet the family, only to whisper sarcastically in my ear, "You're just a wage slave, stay in the kitchen out of sight." But the moment her boyfriend walked in and saw me, he trembled, dropped his gift box, and stammered, "CEO, why are you here?" On the afternoon of December 23rd, the streets outside my office window were gridlocked. The bustling London crowds hurried by, laden with shopping bags, Christmas trees, and holly wreaths. Inside the office, the rhythmic clatter of keyboards continued steadily. I was reviewing the final Q4 revenue reports for the entire Pure Brew Botanicals chain. Over the past year, we had expanded with 15 new branches in the home counties, and our profit margins had far exceeded expectations. My assistant knocked softly and stepped in, placing a warm cup of Earl Grey tea on my desk. "Boss," she reminded me gently, "the departments are winding down. For the Christmas break, you should head off early and get some rest, too." I nodded, reaching up to adjust the collar of my simple beige linen shirt. After 9 years of struggling in this city, from a waitress running herself ragged on minimum wage to single-handedly building my own organic beverage brand, my style hadn't changed. No blinding designer labels, no ostentatious jewelry. My staff respected me for my work ethic, not the price tags draped over my body. Suddenly, the screen of my mobile phone lit up. It was an unknown number with a dialing code from the dreary post-industrial Yorkshire town where I grew up. My finger hovered over the mouse, freezing for a second. In that town, the only voice I ever wanted to hear was Auntie Sarah's, and her number was already saved. My eyes darkened, but I still reached out and swiped to answer. "Hello? Hannah, love, is that you?" The voice on the other end was sickly sweet, dripping with a fake affection that immediately gave me goosebumps. Even after 8 years, that tone was unmistakable. It was Dawn, the stepmother who had slammed the front door in my face on that freezing Christmas Eve all those years ago. I didn't reply. I looked away from the monitor and leaned back in my chair. Met. With my silence, she seemed slightly embarrassed, but quickly recovered with a forced, fluttering laugh. "Oh, my days, it's an unknown number, so you didn't recognize your stepmom, did you? You've changed your number so many times," I had to ask around forever to get this one. "How's work down in London? Must be exhausting, eh? Doing all that grueling hourly work. Make sure you look after your health. Why are you calling?" I cut her off, my tone flat, neither high nor low. Dawn clicked her tongue, lowering her voice to feign a loving, reproachful tone. "Why are you being so cold, girls? It's nearly Christmas. We've just had the front of the house redecorated this year. It looks lovely. You should make arrangements to come home and have Christmas dinner with the family. Your dad misses you terribly. He talks about you all the time. Even your sister Chloe keeps asking if you'll be coming back this year." I twirled a biro between my fingers. Lies rolled in sugar. They sounded pleasant to the ear, but inside, they were entirely hollow. Over the past 8 years, I had moved from one grotty flat share to another, ended up in hospital from exhaustion more than once, and not a single phone call or message checking on me had ever come from them. Now, suddenly, because the house was redecorated, they remembered they had a daughter out on the streets. "I'm busy with work," I replied shortly, intending to hang up. Wait, don't hang up," Dawn called out frantically. The loud noise of the telly in her background was hastily turned down. She pleaded in a grating whine. "Hannah, I'm being serious. The past is the past. Why hold a grudge? It just weighs heavy on the heart. At the end of the day, blood is thicker than water. You absolutely must come home this year. I just want our family reunited for a Merry Christmas Eve dinner, all right, love?" I looked out at the interlacing traffic below, glowing with festive lights. The people out there were rushing home, but for me, the word home had long become a twisted, distorted concept. If there's something you want, just spit it out. I stopped spinning the pen, halting her flowery nonsense. The line went quiet for 3 seconds. Dawn's breathing faltered, and she tried to cover it up with a stiff laugh. "What could I possibly want? I just feel sorry for you, all alone down there, spending Christmas by yourself. Our family isn't short of anything now. Anyway, just think about it. If you can make it, give me a ring so I can tell your dad to set a place for you." She hurriedly hung up before I could say another word. The dial tone hummed. Steadily. I placed the phone down on the glass desk. The office fell into as vacant. Absolute silence, save for the faint hum of the air conditioning. My stepmother never did anything without a motive. She was a cunning woman who worshipped her biological daughter and despised her stepchild, someone who used to calculate every penny of my electricity and water usage. For her to swallow, her pride, track down my number, and beg me to come home for Christmas meant there was a definite reason, and that reason had absolutely nothing to do with family affection. I pulled open the bottom drawer of my desk. Buried deep inside was an old, frayed leather purse with a tarnished zipper. I opened it and pulled out a single banknote from the deepest compartment, a 20-pound note. I had meticulously flattened and pressed it between stiff cards, but the crumpled, stained creases from the past could never truly be smoothed out. My finger brushed the ragged edge of the note, the stinging pain still lingering in my chest. For 8 years, I had risen from nothing, generating millions of pounds in profit, yet this 20-pound note remained the most expensive and the cheapest currency I had ever received in my life. My eyes lingered on the Queen's face. The bustling noises of the London streets on December 23rd seemed to be drained away. The cold grip of the past dragged me violently back to the freezing Christmas Eve 8 years ago. I was 18. Outside, a bitter Yorkshire sleet was falling, the biting wind piercing through every layer of clothing. Our gas hob was broken on one side. I was standing there, using the weak flame to reheat a bowl of leftover soup from lunch. Before the soup could even simmer, a dull thud echoed from the living docking Tynemers a Ninemer Tyne room. My faded canvas holdall had been violently thrown onto the freezing lottowed linoleum floor. I turned off the gas and walked out. Dawn was standing with her hands on her hips in front of my bedroom, her face dark with fury. Chloe, my younger half-sister, who was 2 years my junior, was lounging on the fake leather sofa, texting on her phone and glaring at me with blatant defiance. "Pack your things and get out," Dawn jutted her chin, her shrill voice piercing my eardrums. "Chloe is in year 13 now. She's doing her A-levels next year. With you pacing around the house making a racket, she can't focus on her revision. She just complained about a migraine." I looked at the canvas bag lying pathetically on the floor. Inside were a few pieces of secondhand clothing and the textbooks I had just packed for my upcoming university term in London. "Tonight is Christmas Eve," I said, trying desperately to keep my voice from trembling. "Even if I leave, my coach isn't until Boxing Day." "So what if it's Christmas Eve?" Dawn cut me off, slamming her hand on the port-ins table. "Go stay at Sarah's house, or go rent a room down the high street. This house is too cramped for 2 girls in 1 room. If Chloe fails her A-levels, our Chloe fails her A-levels. You going to compensate her for her future?" She claimed Chloe was revising, yet her A-level textbooks were neatly stacked under the coffee table, while her phone screen constantly lit up with social media notifications. I didn't argue with Dawn. I shifted my gaze to the man sitting hunched on a low, plastic stool in the corner of the room. Thomas, my biological father, was wearing a frayed wool jumper. His shoulders were slumped, his face buried toward the cracked concrete skirting board. He held a cheap roll-up cigarette, taking deep drags, the acrid smoke swirling in the suffocating air. I waited. I waited for him to lift his eyes, to say a single sentence. "It's snowing out there, let the girl finish her dinner." But no. My father just kept smoking, letting the ash fall onto the toes of his boots. He was terrified of Dawn, the fear of a cowardly man so reliant on his second wife's ability to manage the household that he had surrendered his very dignity as a father. It was only a while later, when Dawn kicked my holdall again and hurried me along, that my father finally stood up. He shuffled toward me, his eyes averting mine, unable to look his own daughter in the face. He reached into his trousers and pulled out a crumpled 20-pound note. He shoved it into my hand, his calloused fingers freezing cold. "You, take your things and go stay at Auntie Sarah's for a few days. You know how your stepmom gets. Dad's in a difficult spot. Dad's in a difficult spot." Those 6 words crushed the entirety of my self-respect and the last fragile strand of hope I had left. I clenched the note in my palm, feeling every crease dig into my flesh. I didn't cry. Tears wouldn't fix the cold of Christmas Eve, nor would they warm a heart that had already run dry. I slung the bag over my shoulder and walked out into the night. The biting, northern wind hit my face, the sleet soaking my hair. I walked 2 miles, straight past the town's high street. The warm lights from people's windows cast glows over steaming, festive Christmas Eve dinners. By the time I knocked on the door of Auntie Sarah's terraced house at the end of a narrow alley, I was drenched to the bone. Auntie Sarah was busy putting a tray of mince pies into the oven. When she opened the door and saw me, the metal tray dropped from her hands with a clatter. Wearing an apron stained with flour and suet, she lunged forward, pulled me into a fierce embrace. "Good God, Hannah, what's happened to you, my girl?" That night, as I sat cupping a mug of hot Bovril that Auntie Sarah had made, watching her wipe away tears while cursing her brother's cruelty, I told myself, maybe Dad is just busy. Maybe after midnight he'll sneak a phone call to me. But my phone remained dead silent the entire holiday. That family had truly died, the night they pushed me out of their door. Ring, ring. The loud vibration of my phone jolted me back from the avalanche of memories. The 20 pounds note in my hand had been squeezed into a tight wad. I took a deep breath, smoothed it out, and carefully placed it back in the drawer before looking at the screen. It was Auntie Sarah. The corners of my mouth involuntarily softened. I picked up the call. "Yes, Auntie, I'm here." "Hannah, love, are you not home yet? It's almost Christmas. How's work down?" "There?" Auntie Sarah's voice boomed through the speaker, carrying the familiar, down-to-earth warmth of someone who worked tirelessly all year round. "I've just finished up, Auntie. How's your Christmas shopping going? Did you receive the Fortnum and Mason hamper and the cured meats I sent?" "I got them. Why do you buy so much stuff? What a waste of money. Your uncle and I barely eat that much. It's not easy for you, working hourly wages in the big city." Auntie Sarah grumbled affectionately, then suddenly dropped her voice and clicked her tongue. "By the way, did Dawn ring you earlier?" I raised an eyebrow. "Yes, she did. She told me to come home for Christmas. I didn't accept." "I knew it." Auntie Sarah let out a sharp scoff. "Don't you believe a word out of that woman's mouth. Whenever she's suddenly nice, she's plotting something. Mark my words." I spun my chair to look at the London skyline. "What is she plotting, Auntie? I have nothing left for her to calculate over." "You don't, but your status does." Auntie Sarah clicked her tongue in disgust. "That Chloe, she didn't get anywhere with her A-levels. She's been loafing around the house living off them for over a year. But a few months ago, she somehow snagged a boyfriend from the city. I hear he's a company director or something, very well off. This morning, Dawn was bragging loudly down at the market, saying her precious son-in-law is coming to meet the family on Christmas Day. I listened patiently, still not understanding what this had to do with me. But the boy's family is strictly business class. Apparently they value proper upbringing, Auntie Sarah continued. They sent word that they want to see how the family behaves before agreeing to any marriage. Dawn is panicking. She only enduration, has one lazy, unemployed daughter in the house, and Thomas just sits there mute. She's terrified the boy's family will look down on them for being a person. Dysfunctional, broken home, so she thought of you. Ah, now I understood. A perfectly scripted theatrical performance. She wants to use your reputation as an independent girl working in the city. She wants you to come back and play the part of a warm, harmonious, successful, our family to make the bride's side look good, Auntie Sarah said, her voice dripping with venom. If you go back, she'll probably use you as a prop, boasting about how you have a high-paying city job to polish Chloe's image. Bloody hell. When she kicked you out, she cut all ties. But when there's profit to be made, she's all sweetness. Don't be stupid enough to go back and play servant for them. Well, my stepmother certainly didn't disappoint me. 8 years ago, for her daughter's future, she kicked me out. 8 years later, also for her daughter's the future, she was rolling out the red carpet to invite me back as a stage prop. In their eyes, I was never family. I was just an object thrown away when I was an eyesore, picked up and dusted off when I was useful. I understand, Auntie, I replied softly. Don't worry, just carry on with your way. Baking and shopping? Save me a bowl of your beef stew, will you? Does that mean you're coming home, love? Come stay at mine. Your room is already made up. Auntie Sarah's voice brightened instantly. Yes, I'll be there on Christmas Day. I hung up, put the phone down, and moved my mouse. opening a new tab on my browser. I searched for National Express overnight coaches running from London to Yorkshire for the early hours of tomorrow morning. I was going back to my hometown, not to hide in the small terraced house, and absolutely not to obediently play a prop in Dawn and Chloe's grotesque little play. 8 years of hiding from the past was enough. It was time I stepped through that green-painted iron gate to personally smash their rotten facade and end all their delusions. The morning of Christmas Eve, the city was enveloped in thick fog and a biting cold front. I woke up at 5:30 a.m., leisurely brewed myself a cup of warm tea, and began packing. My suitcase was very light. After 9 years navigating the corporate world, running a massive organic beverage chain with dozens of branches, I had more than enough money to drape myself in the most expensive designer labels to intimidate the people who once despised me. But I didn't. Retaliation through clothes or jewelry is only for people who I still care about how others perceive them. For me, what I wanted to sever was a Cation, toxic relationship not to put on a fashion show. I chose dark denim jeans, a gray turtleneck jumper, and threw on a dark wool trench coat that reached my knees. Minimal makeup, my black hair tied low at the nape of my neck. I looked exactly like a standard struggling office worker who scraped by all year to save a few pennies. Most of my luggage consisted of the Christmas gifts I had prepared specifically for Auntie Sarah and Uncle Harry. High-grade loose-leaf teas, organic preserves from our partners, and a thick envelope of cash for them to treat themselves. There was absolutely not a single tin of biscuits or a branch of holly for the house with the green iron gate. At 6 a.m., I took an Uber down to London Victoria Coach Station. The terminal, just before Christmas, was predictably chaotic and claustrophobic. The blaring of coach horns, the shouting of drivers, the dragging of suitcase wheels over uneven tarmac all blended together. The smell of diesel mingled with the rushed breaths of hundreds of people hauling massive Primark bags and wrapped gifts. Everyone was frantically fighting for a seat to get home for the holidays. I found the coach I had booked, showed my ticket QR code, and climbed up to the upper deck, curling up in a window seat. The heavy vehicle slowly crawled through the dense traffic to escape the London outskirts. Outside the window, a drizzle began to fall, tracing murky lines down the glass. The cold radiating from the window was damp and sharp. I leaned my head against the headrest and closed my eyes. The journey up north would take over 4 hours. Just as the coach hit the M1, my phone vibrated in my coat pocket. The screen displayed one short word, Dad. My thumb hovered over the screen. I hesitated for 3 heartbeats, but eventually swiped to answer. I brought the phone to my ear but didn't speak. First, the other end was met with an awkward silence. A few seconds later, a familiar clearing of the throat sounded, carrying his usual hesitation. Hannah? Hannah, is that you? Yes, I replied softly, my eyes still on the bare trees flashing past the window. Where? Where are you now? Thomas's voice was slightly hoarse, accompanied by a faint click-click sound. It was a nervous tick of his. Whenever he was stressed, he would flick his cheap lighter on and off without actually lighting. Otsigarette. The coach just left London, I answered, my pacing even. Another pause. I could almost picture him standing shivering in the corner of the garden, glancing nervously back at the house to see if Dawn was watching, before daring to whisper into the receiver. That was who he was. A man who spent his life bowing his head to his second wife, so much so that even calling his biological daughter required him to skulk around like a thief, or perhaps Dawn, was standing right behind him, forcing him to make this call to ensure her puppet arrived on schedule. Is that so? Well, travel safe, my father stammered. And, listen, he dragged out the last word as if searching for a way to package an unreasonable player. Demand. I let the steady rumble of the coach engine fill the void, neither rushing him nor encouraging him. Tomorrow, when you get home for Christmas, try to look a bit cheerful. He finally got to the point. Chloe told me her boyfriend is coming over. I hear he's a big director, owns a proper property. You're the older sister, so when we have guests, remember to be tactful and behave properly in front of him. I slightly shifted my posture in the seat. Behave properly? What does that mean, Dad? Just be agreeable. Act like sisters who look out for each other. His voice grew quieter, carrying a pathetic level of submissiveness. You know how Your stepmom is. It's Christmas. Just swallow your pride a bit and act the part so the house can be peaceful. Don't let outsiders look in and laugh at our family. Peaceful. Hearing that word from this man's mouth was deeply ironic. Their peace was built upon my sacrifice, upon my humiliation, and now they wanted to use me as a stepping stone for their precious daughter to climb to a higher social status. I didn't scream. The fury that used to tear at my chest at 18 had long been replaced by a profound, utter exhaustion. I looked away from the condensation-covered glass and stared straight at the low ceiling of the coach. You're telling me to act for the sake of a peaceful house, my voice dropped, enunciating every word clearly. Do you remember how peaceful it was out on the freezing streets on Christmas Eve 8 years ago? The other end of the line went dead silent, save for the click-click-click of the lighter, now frantic and erratic. My father let out a choked gasp in his throat. The hollow platitudes about family and reputation he was about to spew were forcefully shoved back down his throat. I didn't wait for him to come up with another excuse. Don't call me again. I'm on my way. When the screen went black, I shoved the phone deep into my coat pocket and pulled my thin scarf up to my chin. The coach rattled over stretches of uneven roadworks. The jarring bumps traveled up my spine, but strangely, my mind was calmer than ever. By 11:30 a.m., the coach slowed down and turned off the dual carriageway, heading toward the Old Town Center. I dragged my suitcase down the cramped aisle and stepped off near the High Street intersection. The northern wind slapped me in the face the second the doors opened. The town had changed a bit over 8 years. The old cobbled roads had been freshly tarmacked. A few chain convenience stores and corrugated iron cafes had popped up. Flashing neon signs competed with buckets of cheap holly being sold on the pavements. But the smell of my hometown was exactly the same. It was the scent of damp brickwork, coal smoke from old chimneys, and the musty aroma of mossy walls after endless winter drizzles. I stopped at the fork in the road. In front of me were two paths. The right path led 500 yards down to a 2-story semi-detached house, freshly painted a pale yellow with a green iron gate that was always firmly locked. That was where Thomas, Dawn, and Chloe lived, alongside a Christmas dinner table that was always missing one chair. The left path turned into a narrow, winding alley with cracked paving slabs filled with muddy puddles. At the end of the alley was Auntie Sarah's moss-roofed terraced house, the place that, 8 years ago, opened its door to take in a shivering, soaked girl who had nowhere else to go. I gripped my suitcase handle tightly. My trainers stepped into a small puddle, splashing a few specks of mud onto the hem of my jeans. I didn't even look. Toward the right path, my boots pointed straight toward the winding alleyway. The deeper I went, the more the noise of the high street faded, replaced by the bloat, clatter of washing up and the sound of water splashing as neighbors cleaned their front steps for Christmas. In the distance, a stout figure wearing a burgundy puffer jacket was tossing a brassless bucket of water over the patio. It was Uncle Harry. Well, I'll be. Hannah, is that you, lass? Uncle Harry dropped his plastic bucket, rubbing his eyes as if he couldn't believe the sight before him. His shout startled the 2 black Labradors curled up under the porch. They barked excitedly, rushing to the gate, their tails wagging furiously against the rotting wooden fence. From the kitchen, a loud, booming woman's voice echoed out, followed by the slap of slippers running across the linoleum. Who is it? Is Hannah home? Standing in front of that tiny yard, I could smell the rich, fatty aroma of beef. An ale stew wafting from the kitchen. The bone-chilling cold of the 4-hour coach ride and the sting of Thomas's phone call instantly vanished. I pushed the bay wooden gate open and smiled. It was the first genuine smile I had worn since booking my ticket. I'm home, Auntie. As soon as my words fell, the woman washing potatoes at the sink jerked her head up. Auntie Sarah dropped her plastic colander onto the wet floor, ignoring her, hands that were red raw from the freezing water. She hastily wiped her hands on her faded, stained apron and ran out to the gate. For heaven's sake, why didn't you ring ahead so your uncle could pick you up? From the station, you daft girl? Her mouth scolded, but her arms had already pulled me into a crushing hug. The smell of cooking gas, fresh potatoes, and the familiar scent of hard work filled my nose, bringing a wave of warmth that flooded my chest. For the past 8 years, this embrace was the only place in the world that made me feel I still had a family. Uncle Harry stepped out, quickly snatching the suitcase from my hand. Leave. That, I'll take it. You must be freezing. Get inside and warm your hands before you catch your death. I stepped over the threshold, looking at the cramped but impeccably tidy living room. The old furniture had been polished to a shine, and a tin of quality. Street sat next to a steaming pot of tea, the Labradors bounded around my legs. There were no expensive leather sofas here, no dazzling crystal chandeliers like in the house with the green gate, but this place had human warmth, the breath of true peace. That afternoon, our early Christmas Eve dinner was laid out on a simple wooden table. It was just humble food, a steaming bowl of beef stew, some cold cuts, and pickled onions. But to me, this meal was infinitely more luxurious than any corporate banquet at a five-star hotel in London. Auntie Sarah heaped my plate with food, constantly picking out the best cuts of beef for me. Eat up, lass. Eat as much as you can. She looked sympathetically at my thin wrists poking out of my jumper. Working for an hourly wage in London must be brutal, eh? No one to cook for you. Look how skinny you've gotten. Next? Time. Just bring yourself. Don't waste money on fancy teas and jams. Keep your money for a rainy day. A girl all on her own in the big city. I looked down at my food, letting the steam from the stew sting my nose. I didn't correct her. I let my aunt and uncle believe I was still just a struggling wage earner. This deception wasn't malicious. I just wanted to preserve the absolute purity of their love. Auntie Sarah loved me when I had nothing, when I was soaked and humiliated. If she knew I was now the owner of a massive corporate chain, an invisible barrier of hesitation and deference might accidentally form between us. I can take care of myself, I smiled, putting a piece of beef on her plate. You and Uncle Harry eat too. Next year, when things are more stable, I'll bring you both down to London for a proper holiday. Uncle Harry laughed heartily, taking a sip of his bitter. Ah, it's too cramped and busy down there. We're used to it up here. You just look after yourself? That's all we ask. The meal passed with roaring laughter and the sound of a Christmas comedy special playing on the telly. The gaping hole in my heart from the Christmas Eve of my 18th year seemed to be filled by every spoonful of that hot stew. Night fell, and the frost set in, bitterly cold. Auntie Sarah and I sat in the living room, cracking roasted chestnuts. The light from the old bulb cast our shadows against the peeling wallpaper. Auntie Sarah pushed a pile of shells aside, letting out a long sigh that broke the silence. She clicked her tongue, her voice lowering. Hannah. Yes, I'm listening. I stopped peeling. Tomorrow morning, on Christmas Day, go buy some fruit and take it over to your dad's house. Put it on the mantelpiece for your grandparents and for your mum. Auntie Sarah advised, her eyes shining with the wisdom of a woman who had seen it all. I know you're angry with your dad, and you hate Dawn, but as the younger generation, it's the right thing to do. Just walk in with your head held high and pay your respects. I looked at the flickering light, not answering immediately. Like I said, ignore whatever Dawn says, no matter how much she shows off her precious son-in-law. Treat it like water off a duck's back. Her rough hand patted mine gently. Pay your respects, then come straight back here for dinner. You've done nothing wrong. You have no reason to hide or be afraid of that. Woman's mouth. Her words were simple but struck the very core of my thoughts. For 8 years, I had refused to return to this town not because I feared Dawn and Chloe, but because I didn't want to touch the old wounds caused by the cowardice of the man who called himself my father. But hiding wouldn't make the past disappear. My silence only made them think I was still the weak, easily manipulated girl I used to be. It was time I faced them to personally sever this last fragile thread, not with screaming or resentment, but with the clearest, coldest full stop. All right, I'll go tomorrow morning, I replied softly. By 11 p.m., the town had fallen into a quiet slumber. I lay in the small bedroom Auntie Sarah had prepared. The duvet was freshly laundered, smelling of fabric softener and winter sun. I reached for my phone on the bedside table, the blue light illuminating my face in the dark. I opened my work messaging app and typed a quick message to my assistant in London. Jane, pull up all the files of partners applying for the regional master franchise in the Yorkshire area. Filter the ones submitted this month and email them to me now. Read. Even during the holidays, my assistant was always sharp and responsive. Less than 5 minutes later, the phone buzzed. An email with a PDF attachment arrived along with a message. Yes, boss. There are 3 pending applications for that region. I've compiled them for you. I clicked on the PDF, zooming in on the screen. The basic information, financial capacity reports, and asset collateral documents to prove working capital scrolled past my eyes. My finger stopped on the second page. Candidate for exclusive regional franchise. Philip Hayes. Current title: Business Development Director at a small-scale startup. Below that was a litany of flowery commitments about his sales abilities and his desire to align with the vision of Pure Brew Botanicals. The capital Philip declared was raised by remortgaging his London flat and taking substantial loans from relatives. Clearly, the man was betting his entire career and net worth on this franchise contract. An all-or-nothing gamble, hoping to leverage my brand's reputation to change his life. All the clues Auntie Sarah had mentioned that afternoon fit together perfectly. Chloe's boyfriend, named Philip, was a director coming to meet the family. His family valued proper upbringing, and he was looking for business opportunities. I slowly locked my phone. The room was utterly silent. My stepmother wanted to use my title as a city wage earner as a backdrop to make her daughter and her precious son-in-law shine. She wanted to prove to the boy's family the fake, respectable upbringing she had fabricated. The corners of my mouth twitched into a faint smile that didn't reach my eyes. A man who mortgaged his entire life to beg for a franchise from me was foolishly hoping to use a broken, materialistic family to boost his value in front of his ultimate boss. Tomorrow's play was going to be spectacularly entertaining. I pulled the duvet up to my shoulders and closed my eyes. Christmas morning in the town was draped in a thin, ethereal mist. The air was freezing but crystal clear. From the alleyway, the smell of roasted meats and distant church bells wafted onto the porch. I woke up early, neatly folded my duvet, and washed my face with freezing water. From the tap, wiping the water from my cheeks, I went back to the room and leisurely opened my suitcase. Today was the day I stepped through that green, iron gate after 8 long years. If this were a cliché soap opera, the protagonist would don the most expensive designer dress, carry a limited edition Birkin, and wear blinding diamonds to crush the arrogance of those who look down on her. But I didn't do that. Firstly, as a pragmatic business owner, I despised flashy displays of wealth. Secondly, taking revenge via clothing is just the fragile armor of the insecure. True power doesn't lie in how much your coat costs, but in whether you have the power to nod or shake your head at someone else's livelihood. I pulled out a thin beige cashmere jumper and paired it with meticulously tailored black wool trousers, throwing the dark trench coat over it. Remained loose and natural. I wore no jewelry whatsoever, except for my usual Roman numeral watch on my left wrist. I looked elegant and tidy but exuded absolutely no ostentatious wealth. I fit perfectly into the script of the prosent struggling wage earner that stepmother Dawn had written for me. Brewing a small pot of tea, I sat by the wooden table near the window and opened my laptop. The screen lit up, displaying the PDF Jane had sent last night. My finger glided over the trackpad. Candidate for exclusive regional franchise. My eyes scanned Philip's financial capability and business plan. He presented it, well, proving he had experience in the cutthroat corporate world. He had accurately targeted Pure Brew Botanicals, the brand currently holding the Hashone spot in retail franchising. But what caught my attention most was the capital proof. To meet my company's initial franchise fee and deposit requirements, which ran into the hundreds of thousands of pounds, Philip had mortgaged a flat in his name and borrowed heavily. An all-in gamble. He was draining every resource he had to reach for the D-Bay Pure Brew contract. He truly believed that securing the regional exclusivity would make him a millionaire. Dawn had no idea that the precious son-in-law she was so proud of the director was actually kneeling in wait for a signature of approval from the very stepdaughter she despised. Outside, the sound of a stiff broom scraping the patio echoed. Auntie Sarah was sweeping away the frost. Seeing me step out, she stopped, wiping the sweat from Slash. Her brow with her sleeve, her eyes flashing with a mix of anxiety and pity. Heading over there, are you? Yes, I'm just going to drop off some fruit and pay my respects to Mum, then I'll be right back, I replied, adjusting my collar. Auntie Sarah nodded, walking over to straighten my coat lapels. Her rough hands carried the genuine warmth of family. When you're over there, if Dawn says anything snide, just let it go in one ear and out the other. It's Christmas Day. Don't bring frustration upon yourself. Just pay your respects and leave. I've got the beef stew simmering on the hob. We'll eat when you get back. I looked at the pot steaming slightly on the stove. The bowl of soup 8 years ago had been stone cold and bitter. The stew today was warm and waiting for my return. The concept of a home, it turned out, was never defined by a name on a face, deed or calculated holiday feasts. Leave it on a low heat. I'll be back by 11 for lunch. I smiled lightly, turning and walking out of the alley. The streets on Christmas morning were deserted. The shops were shuttered, with only a few families in their Sunday best walking toward the church. The northern wind whipped my face, but my steps were incredibly steady. I strolled through the familiar intersection, the scenery sliding backward, carrying the melancholic memories of a youth spent shrinking and enduring just to buy a fake sense of peace. In the past, whenever I walked home from school down this road, my chest would tighten with fear, wondering what excuse Dawn would find to berate me, or what lies Chloe would invent to make my father sigh and turn away. But right now, my chest was as placid as a frozen winter lake. 15 minutes later, I stopped. In front of me was the 2-story semi-detached house, freshly painted a striking pale yellow. The signature green iron gate was still there, though it had been sanded down and given a glossy new coat of paint. This was the gate where I was thrown out into the snow. This was the gate where my father stood with his back to me, smoking, leaving his biological daughter to endure the freezing Christmas Eve. I stood silently on the pavement for a few seconds, staring at the swirling iron patterns. A neighbor walking his dog passed by, recognized me, and opened his her mouth to say hello. But seeing my eerily calm expression, he thought better of it. Inside the house, the living room door was wide open. Even from the street, I could hear loud, boastful laughter echoing out. Chloe, go upstairs and change into that red silk dress I bought you. Hurry up. Philip will be here any minute. If he sees you looking like a scruff, we'll lose. Face, Dawn's shrill voice rang out, dripping with the pride of a mother about to welcome a wealthy son-in-law. I know, Mum. Iron the collar for me. Philip is very particular. If he sees our house looking a mess, he'll judge us. Chloe whined back, followed by the heavy thud of footsteps running up the wooden stairs. Then came the clattering of plates and Dawn's bossy commands. Thomas, bring the cams. Tin of shortbread out here and wipe down the glass table. Our guest is a big shot director. We need to look proper. Look sharp. My father's quiet, submissive mumbles were entirely swallowed by his wife's letter, overbearing shouts. Everything behind that gate was exactly the same. A portrait of a loud, materialistic family. The weak bowed their heads. The strong berated them. The only difference was that today, they were setting a stage, putting on their finest costumes to perform a play called The Happy Family. I took a deep breath of the freezing morning air. My finger gently traced the Woningsextolerade edge of my coat. Without further hesitation, I reached out and pushed the green iron gate open. Inside the living room, the smell of fresh paint mingled with the scent of cheap potpourri, creating a suffocatingly dense atmosphere. The room had been completely rearranged. The old MDF furniture had been replaced by a massive, faux leather sofa that took up most of the floor space. On the glass table sat a garish, gold-plated biscuit tin and a vase of overly stylized lilies that were already drooping from a lack of water. The forced, tacky display was painfully obvious, much like trying to drape expensive silk over a body covered in sores. Hearing the squeak of the iron gate, the 3 pairs of eyes inside instantly darted toward the porch. My father was hunched on the edge of a small stool in the corner. Seeing me walk in, his thin frame gave a slight jolt. He awkwardly scrambled to his feet, wiping his hands on his worn jumper, and took a step forward, reaching for the teapot. Hannah, you're home? Come in and have a warm cup of tea. But before his sentence could finish, a sharp, cold clearing of a throat from NES, the main sofa, cut him off. Dawn shot a glare as sharp as a razor at Thomas, slicing his face. My father immediately fell silent, the hand reaching for the teapot froze in midair, then violently retracted as if he'd touched a hot coal. He slumped back onto the stool, his head bowed, avoiding my gaze entirely. I swept my eyes past him without a ripple of emotion. 8 years ago, he stood still and watched me get kicked out. 8 years later, he was still just a mute shadow in his own home. Also sitting on the sofa were two elderly neighbors who had popped in for early 22. Christmas greetings. Seeing me, they gasped in surprise. Dawn instantly changed her expression. The furious glare she had aimed at her husband flipped like a switch into a radiant, sycophantic smile, so wide that the wrinkles at the corners of her eyes bunched together. She stood up, bustling, over to grab my hand and pull me inside. Her sugary voice was loud enough for the whole street to hear. Oh my goodness, this girl has been away working in London for years. She finally had some free time to come visit us for Christmas. Look at our Hannah. Doesn't she look proper now? One of the neighbors bit into a biscuit and laughed heartily. You're the luckiest one, Dawn. Your eldest is off being successful in the city. And later, on, your youngest is bringing home a wealthy lad. All the blessings are pouring day into your house this year. Oh, you're exaggerating. Dawn waved her hand, feigning modesty while her chin tilted up in sheer arrogance. Our Hannah just works a standard wage job in London, nothing special. But our Chloe, she got lucky and met a proper company director. When he gets here later, the sisters will have a lovely catch-up. I'm just happy we have such a warm family. I stood perfectly still, letting her shake my wrist as she played the role of the loving mother. Her palm was freezing and stiff. I didn't pull away, nor did I reply. I just silently watched the hypocritical morality play roll on before my eyes. A few minutes later, the two neighbors stood up to leave. Dawn walked them all the way to the iron gate, her mouth not stopping its stream of festive pleasantries. But the very second the neighbors disappeared behind the brick wall, the smile on her face vanished, exactly like a flipped switch. She spun around, stomping back into the house. The welcoming grip and sweet tone were gone. She marched straight to the kitchen area adjoining the living room, ripped a tacky nylon floral apron off a hook, balled it up, and threw it directly at me. It flew past the table and landed on the armrest of the wooden prize-it chair I was standing next to. Get in the kitchen and help Chloe prep the veg and peel the potatoes, Dawn ordered, her shrill voice reclaiming the tyrannical authority of 8 years ago. My future son-in-law is coming. His family cares about appearances. Get a BA came. Move on and polish those wine glasses until they shine. I lowered my eyes to look at the crumpled apron resting on the chair. She hadn't called me home for a meal. She had called me back to be a scullery maid, to be a dim, fading shadow in the kitchen, solely to highlight the leisurely luxury of her precious daughter who was about to marry into money. In Dawn's mind, I would always be the parasitic stepchild. Now, I was granted a ticket home just to serve her vanity. I didn't reach out to pick up the apron. Instead, I pulled the wooden chair out and sat down calmly, my movements as leisurely as if I were sitting in my own executive office. I flipped over a tiny porcelain teacup, picked up the teapot, and slowly poured myself a cup of amber liquid. The steam rose gently, carrying lighter, the scent of cheap jasmine mixed with the musty smell of the sofa. My silence and blatant disobedience left Dawn stunned. Her eyes widened. She took 2 steps forward, hands on her hips, pointing a finger directly at my face. Are you deaf? I told you to go to the kitchen. What are you doing sitting there like a lump? You've been a wage slave all year, can't even afford a decent outfit, and you come back here acting like the Queen of Sheba? Right at that moment, the clack-clack of high heels echoed from the staircase. Chloe appeared. She was wearing a violently red, skin-tight silk dress that clung to her curves. The plunging neckline revealed a chunky, fake gold necklace, her hair curled into massive, elaborate waves. Her face was plastered with thick foundation and bright red lipstick. She looked more like a reality TV extra heading to a cheap nightclub than a daughter welcoming her boyfriend for a family Christmas dinner. Chloe hoisted the hem of her dress and stepped off the last stair, her eyes immediately locking onto me. When she saw my simple beige jumper and plain trousers without a single designer logo, the red-painted corners of her mouth instantly curled into a sneer of contempt. The vague anxiety she had felt about her city sister returning evaporated completely. In Chloe's eyes, I was just a poverty-stricken failure, utterly outclassed by her radiant glamour. "Oh, Hannah's back!" Chloe sauntered over, looking me up and down. "Mum said she called you back so we'd look like a happy family, but you look so poor." She deliberately stressed the word. Thomas, in the corner, shifted slightly. He opened his mouth to say something to stop his youngest daughter, but a blistering glare from Dawn snuffed out his courage. Chloe pulled out a chair and flopped down opposite me. The overpowering smell of cheap perfume hit my nose, making me frown slightly. She rested her chin on her hand, her eyes dancing with smug arrogance. She leaned in close and lowered her voice to a whisper, every word sharp as a knife, dripping with hollow vanity. You've been slaving away in London for years and can't even buy a proper coat. When my Philip gets here, if you have any sense, stay in the kitchen out of sight. Don't open your mouth and embarrass me. Stay in the kitchen out of sight. The words echoed in the stark, cruel living room. The concept of class segregation right inside a family home. The one with money, the one bringing fake prestige, got to sit in the place of honor. The discarded daughter, deemed poor and lowly, had to skulk in the shadows as a rôle de no plaine. Backdrop and keep her mouth shut to protect their fragile egos. I stared intently into Chloe's eyes, noting the overly curled fake lashes. In my 9 years in the corporate world, I had negotiated with the most ruthless partners and forced cunning tycoons to yield at the contract table. And now I was being ordered into the kitchen by an unemployed freeloader using her CEO boyfriend's title, a situation so laughable it was absurd. The kitchen or the dining room? We'll see who has the right to sit where. Shortly, I replied. My voice didn't rise half a pitch. Flat like a winter lake, but it carried an invisible, crushing weight. As soon as I spoke, the smirk on Chloe's face froze. She blinked rapidly, probably not expecting the silent, enduring girl who was kicked onto the streets 8 years ago to strike back with such cold arrogance. Dawn, standing nearby, also stiffened. She took a deep breath, her eyebrows shooting up, ready to unleash a familiar torrent of abuse to put her insolent stepdaughter in her place. What did you just say to me, you? Screech! Dawn's curse was cut off by a noise from the street. The screech of car brakes on the tarmac right outside the garden wall. Dawn and Chloe both jumped, the fury instantly tossed out of their minds. Chloe frantically leaped up, nervously smoothing out the wrinkles in her red silk dress and checking her reflection in her phone screen. He's here. Philip is here, Mum. Dawn was equally frantic. She hurriedly smoothed her hair, adjusted her velvet cardigan, and stammered her orders. Thomas, go open the gate. Hurry, move that rubbish bin out of the way so he can park. My father scrambled up, tripping over the leg of his stool, and scurried out to the iron gate. Dawn turned back to look at me, her eyes filled with panic and impatience. She marched over, reaching out to shove me deep into the darkest corner of the Simon living room, hidden by the shadow of the staircase. You sit back there in the corner. When the guests come in, do not show your scruffy face and ruin your sister's big moment. Keep your mouth firmly shut. She hissed through her teeth, then spun around and practically skipped to the front door with Chloe, pasting on their most radiant smiles to welcome the god, bringing them their dreams of wealth. I didn't resist her push. I took 2 steps back and stood silently, arms crossed, in the dark corner. From here, I had a clear view of the entrance, but anyone walking in from the bright outdoors wouldn't notice me immediately. Out on the street, the car door clicked open, the sound of leather brogues hitting the pavement mixed with the obsequious, ear-piercing greetings of Dawn and Chloe. From the shadows, I leaned against the wall, my eyes calmly fixed on the sunlit porch. A sleek, black Audi SUV parked right by the curb. A man in his early 30s stepped out. He was wearing a sharp, tailored navy suit, highly polished leather, shoes, and his hair was slicked back with expensive pomade. Philip Hayes, exactly as he appeared in the PDF file attached to Jane's email last night. Superficially, he certainly exuded the aura of a man on the rise, brimming with confidence and pride. He walked to the boot of the car and pulled out several large gift bags wrapped in glossy red cellophane. Inside peeked out a Fortnum and Mason hamper and the distinct label of an expensive single malt scotch. Oh my, Philip, you're here. Was the drive exhausting? Dawn rushed out to the blonde car, rubbing her hands together, her smile stretched so wide her gums showed. She eagerly reached out to take the bags, but Philip smoothly dodged her, smiling with practiced politeness. No, the roads were clear for Christmas, Dawn. I made good time. These are heavy, let me carry them. Chloe sashayed out behind her mother, the silk dress rustling loudly. She clung to Philip's arm, pouting her lips, her voice sickly sweet. Are you thirsty? Babe? Mum has had a pot of tea waiting for you for ages. Seeing you cures my thirst instantly. Philip winked flirtatiously, then turned to nod at Thomas, who was standing hunched by the iron gate. My father awkwardly nodded back, hiding his hands in his pockets, completely overshadowed by his future son-in-law's dominant presence. The group trailed into the living room, their loud laughter and chatter filling the cramped space. Dawn pulled out the best spot on the sofa, eagerly inviting Philip to sit in the center. The gold biscuit tin and hot tea were quickly pushed toward him. I remained standing in the dark corner. I was partially obscured by a large potted plant, and the glare from the porch meant that anyone looking from the sofa would only see a blurred silhouette, unless they looked very closely. Philip sat down, crossing one leg over the other, looking utterly relaxed. He placed the gifts on the glass table, deliberately turning the label of expensive scotch outward. A little something for Christmas, Philip announced clearly, timing his words, to show off his spending power. I figured Thomas might enjoy a drop of the good stuff. This is a Macallan. I had a mate bring it back from duty-free. And the hamper is for you, Dawn. Dawn gasped in exaggerated delight, her hands stroking the cellophane. Oh, goodness, just having you here is a gift. Why spend so much money? We don't need for anything. Despite her words, her eyes were glued to the whiskey bottle. After a few rounds of small talk, Dawn skillfully steered the conversation to the topic she cared about most. Chloe tells me your company is doing brilliantly. So young and talented, eh? Director managing so many people. You must be terribly busy, eh? Right on cue, Philip cleared his throat, straightened his back, and began to hold court. Well, yes, I'm juggling quite a few projects at the moment, Dawn. The company is stable, but come the new year, I've decided to make a massive move into retail franchising. He paused, taking a sip of tea, deliberately creating a dramatic silence. I've just remortgaged my flat in London, putting all my capital into securing the exclusive regional franchise for Pure Brew Botanicals. Hearing the name Pure Brew Botanicals, my hand, resting on the wall, tapped rhythmically once. Pure Brew? That's the posh organic coffee and tea chain that's popping up everywhere, right, babe? Chloe chimed in, fluttering her eyelashes in faux admiration. Exactly. It's not just any chain, they're the absolute #1 in the market. Right now, Philip lifted his chin, his voice swelling with pride, acting as if he already owned the place. The brand is incredibly prestigious. Their approval, a process is brutal. You can't just buy your way in. I had to use some serious, high-level connections just to get my application in front of the board. Dawn had frowned slightly at the mention of a remortgaged flat, but hearing #1 in the market and high-level connections made her eyes light up, like headlights. So you'll be the boss of the whole region? Oh my word, you won't know what to do with all that money. Once the CEO signs off on the contract, it's a done deal, Dawn. Philip smiled, triumphantly interlocking his fingers over his knee. The market up here is wide open. Once I have exclusivity, I'll make the house money back in a year. Year 2, I'll be buying a mansion. I was actually thinking, once the business is settled, I'd like to ask your permission to make things permanent with Chloe. Philip's final sentence acted like a massive dose of adrenaline injected straight into Dawn's veins. Chloe giggled bashfully, resting her head on Philip's shoulder. Dawn slapped her thigh with a loud smack, beaming from ear to ear. Brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. A man with ambition, I love it. Intoxicated by the vision of mansions and mountains of cash falling into her lap, Chloe suddenly remembered something that could make her look even better by comparison. She looked up, scanned the room, and stopped at the dark corner. Under the stairs, a vicious, sneering smile crept onto her lips. She deliberately tugged Philip's sleeve, drawing his attention toward me. Phil, babe, Chloe said in a clear, carrying voice, making sure everyone heard. We're a small family, just 2 girls. Standing in the corner over there is Hannah, my older half-sister. She works for an hourly wage down in London, works herself to the bone but never has a penny to her name. She came home for Christmas and couldn't even afford a decent coat. I stood perfectly still, arms crossed, watching her performance unfold. Dawn frowned when I was mentioned, preparing to shoot a warning glare, but Chloe was already pressing on. Since you're opening such a massive franchise, you'll need loads of staff, right? Since we're going to be family, do you think your company has an easy little job for her? A cleaner or a pot washer, maybe? Just sort her out. We can't let her keep slaving away for strangers. People will look at me, about to be a director's wife, and say I let my own sister live in poverty. Every word out of Chloe's mouth flowed smoothly, clearly rehearsed. Her absolute hypocrisy, wrapped in the guise of charity, made her performance flawless. To Philip, Chloe must have looked like a sweet, understanding girl looking out for insane. Her family, while I was obviously a destitute peasant in need of a handout. Hearing this, Philip immediately puffed up, eager to show off his magnanimity as a powerful director. He waved his hand dismissively, puffing out his chest, and laughed expansively. Is that all? A job like that? I'll sort it in a heartbeat. If my girl asks, I could never say no. Philip turned his head, craning his neck slightly to look toward my dark corner. He raised his voice, adopting the condescending, patronizing tone of a superior. Hannah, is it? Don't you worry. Come the new year when we open the branch, I set you up as a cleaner in the store. I'll even pay you above minimum wage, so you don't feel bad. After all, you're fammy. The word died in his throat. I stepped slowly out of the shadows and into the center of the living room. Right where the sunlight from the door hit me perfectly, the heels of my boots clicked against the floor tiles, not loud, but like the ticking countdown of a, quote, time bomb. I stopped about 3 paces from the glass table, both hands in the pockets of my trench coat, my spine perfectly straight. I didn't bow my head. I didn't shrink. I looked straight into the rapidly widening eyes of Philip Hayes. The corners of my mouth twitched up into a faint, utterly cold smile. The clear light illuminated my face, my immaculately tailored trousers, and the Brent's distinctive watch I always wore when chairing board meetings. The generous smile on Philip's face froze solid. His eyes bulged, his pupils contracting as if he had been struck by 10,000 volts. His jaw dropped. The smug wrinkles on his forehead were instantly replaced by stark, unadulterated terror. He frantically reached for his teacup to hide his panic, but his arm had completely lost coordination. His elbow slammed into one of the gift bags on the blank edge of the table. Smash! The expensive bottle of Macallan whiskey was knocked onto the hard floor. The glass shattered into 1,000 pieces, sending sharp shards flying across his feet. The rich amber liquid poured out, instantly soaking into Dawn's brand new Rue. Oh my God! Phil, what's wrong? Chloe jumped, screaming, hastily pulling her legs back to avoid the flying glass on her silk dress. Dawn also sprang up in panic. Good Lord, look at that mess. Are you hurt? Philippe? But Philip didn't hear a word the 2 women were screeching. It was as if he'd been paralyzed. His eyes were glued to my face, his breathing ragged, his chest heaving like a drowning man. I looked at the puddle of expensive whiskey spreading across the floor, then shifted my gaze back to him. My silence in that moment was the most brutal death, sentenced to his arrogance. Philip's legs gave out. He couldn't even sit straight on the sofa. He planted both hands on the glass table and staggered to his feet. The large, grown man was trembling like a leaf. He bowed forward at the waist, adopting the most pathetic, groveling posture imaginable. His throat emitted broken, choking sounds as if someone were crushing his windpipe. CEO, Philip stammered, every syllable heavy and agonizing. Boss, why? Are you here? As his question dropped into the room, every single noise in the house was instantly frozen. Even the sound of my father breathing in the corner seemed to stop. Dawn, who had been reaching for a cloth to wipe the floor, froze mid-air, her mouth hanging wide open. Chloe, mourning her stained rug, heard the word CEO and her neck went rigid. She snapped her head toward her boyfriend with a look of utter disbelief. What? What did you just say? Chloe stammered, her voice shaking. Did you mistake her for someone else? This is Hannah, my sister who works for minimum. Vaga. Philip completely ignored Chloe. He ignored the broken glass crunching beneath. His shoes. He stepped around the table, taking a step closer to me, and hastily bowed his head even lower. Cold sweat beaded on his forehead, ruining the pomade ends pleated in his slicked back hair. Boss, I had no idea you were here, he said, his tone switching from sycophantic to desperately pleading in the blink of an eye. My application. I'm Philip. I just sent the supplementary bank statements this morning. Did you see them, boss? The director, who, seconds ago, was bragging about handing me a cleaning job, had now abandoned every ounce of his pride to beg for a nod of approval. I slowly pulled my hands out of my coat pockets and adjusted my collar. I kept my chin high, letting my cold gaze sweep across the terrified, pale faces in the Brevin room. From the utter shock on Thomas's face, to the extreme panic of Dawn, to Chloe's horrifyingly slack jaw, and finally landing back on the pale, trembling face of Philip. I took one more step forward, the toes of my boots stopping just at the edge of the spilled whiskey. I looked from his sweaty crown down to his hands gripping the edge of the table. Director Hayes, my voice was flat, carrying not a hint of threat, yet it made the man's shoulders flinch violently. Where exactly were you planning on making me a cleaner? The question hung lightly in the air, but to Philip, it felt like a boulder crushing his chest. He frantically waved his hands, his knees bending a bit. Further, the pompous, arrogant facade from a minute ago was stripped bare, leaving only the pathetic desperation of a man clinging to his livelihood. Boss, I was blind. Philip's voice cracked, sweat dripping down his forehead and blurring his vision. I had no idea you were Chloe's sister. I was stupid. I just listened to what they said and misspoke. Please be the bigger person and let this go. Philip swallowed hard, his breath reeking of stale adrenaline. He continued, begging, throwing his entire life savings down as a shield. I've put my heart and soul into the franchise application, boss. I've just finalized the remortgage on my flat, I have the cash ready for the deposit, and I've even put a holding fee on the best retail unit in town. Please, boss, have mercy. Philip's confession was a slap in the face to everyone else standing in the Pramin room. Chloe, who had been standing frozen by the sofa, finally snapped out of her shock. She stared bug-eyed at her boyfriend groveling before me, then looked back at me. The label of struggling wage slave that she had slapped on me shattered into dust. The truth hit her so fast, so brutally, that her narrow, vanity-obsessed brain couldn't process it. She lunged forward, grabbing Philip's suit sleeve, her red manicured nails digging into the fabric. Phil, are you mental? Who are you calling bosses? She's just a failure who's been scraping by in London for years. You're a director. Why are you groveling to this trash? Being yanked violently, the panic in Philip's heart instantly ignited into a roaring, blinding fury. He violently threw Chloe's hand off, the force so hard, she stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the sofa. Shut your mouth, Philip roared, his eyes bloodshot, glaring at Chloe as if he wanted to eat her alive. Are you blind, or are you actively trying to ruin my life? This is the founder of Pure Brew Botanicals. She is the person who, with one stroke of a pen, decides whether I keep my career, my house, and my savings. And you told me she was a bloody cleaner? You stupid B times tooch. Philip's scream bounced off the four walls, delivering a fatal blow to the last remaining delusions of Dawn and her daughter. Dawn stood dead still at the edge of the table. The cleaning cloth fell from her, hand with a wet slap. Her lips trembled. Her horrified eyes darted from Philip's rage to my absolute silence. The sarcastic, insulting words she had spat in my Lotta's face less than half an hour ago had turned around and become razor-sharp blades, stripping away every layer of dignity she had spent her life cultivating. In the corner, my father took a step back, pressing his back against the cold wall. He clutched his chest, opening his mouth to call my name, but the crushing guilt and humiliation blocked any sound from his throat. I glanced over their chaotic collapse. A sense of boredom began to creep in. I had seen plenty of theatrical backstabbing over money in the corporate world. The only difference today was that the actors were supposed to be blood. Relative. Enough, I said. 2 short words, but their authority crushed the noise in the room. Philip instantly shut his mouth, turning back to look at me with the pleading eyes of a beaten dog awaiting its sentence. I took a half step forward, avoiding the sharp glass. I looked straight into Philip's eyes, delivering every word slowly and coldly. I didn't come here today to play happy families, nor did I come to act as a stepping stone for social climbing. I pointed toward the green iron gate. 8 years ago, on the coldest Christmas eve of the year, this family threw my belongings out the door and kicked me onto in the streets so their precious daughter could have peace and quiet to revise. I was 18, and I had exactly a crumpled 20-pound note in my pocket. As I spoke, Philip's face turned ashen. He gulped repeatedly, shooting venomous glances at Dawn and Chloe. He was smart enough to realize he had stepped into a toxic swamp, a swamp he thought was a respectable, loving family. I pulled my hand back, crossing my arms, my voice hardening with the absolute authority of an owner. Business requires capital and connections, but the foundation of it must be ethics and integrity. My company was born from the days I scraped together pennies on the street. I do not hand my life's work over to someone who cannot judge character. I paused a beat, staring into Philip's dilated pupils. Your franchise application is officially rejected. On the 27th, my assistant will email you a formal notice of cancellation. The verdict was delivered. There was no heavier sentence than stripping away the entire fantasy and livelihood of a man who had bet his house on it. Philip's legs turned to jelly. He dropped to one knee right next to the puddle of spilled whiskey. Everything in front of him collapsed. No franchise, no pure brew. That meant the flat mortgage to the bank was going to be repossessed, and the loans from his family would turn into a mountain of debt. He had lost everything just because he participated in a pathetic display of fake prestige. He slowly looked up. The pleading, sycophantic look from a moment ago vanished, replaced by a crazed, burning hatred that incinerated his reason. He staggered, up, spun around, and lunged at Chloe like a cornered animal. Ah! Chloe shrieked, backing away, clutching her chest. Philip grabbed her wrist, yanking it so hard she nearly face-planted. He pointed a finger right in her face, spit flying as he hurled toxic insults. Respectable upbringing. Loving family. You told me your family was proper, that your parents were so supportive. It turns out your whole family is a bunch of scum who kicked their own flesh and blood onto the street. And then you conned me into coming here to set me up. Chloe burst into terrified, heaving sobs, her heavy makeup running down her distorted face. Phil, I didn't know. I swear on my life I didn't know she was. Your boss! Didn't know? You opened your mouth and told me she worked for minimum wage. You told me to offer her a cleaning job. You're psychotic. Were you trying to kill me? Trying to drag me down to the gutter with this broken, scummy family? Philip screamed, releasing her wrist and swinging a violent slap into the air. He didn't hit her face, but the motion alone made Chloe shrink back, trembling violently. Dawn's heart ached for her daughter. She rushed over to shield Chloe, stammering, with a trembling voice. Philip, please calm down, we can fix this. It was a misunderstanding. Misunderstanding my arse. Philip shoved Dawn's arm away, his eyes filled with pure disgust. Do you think I'm thick? You dragged me here to bleed me dry for wedding money, didn't you? You can all play your twisted little games by yourselves. The wedding is off. As of this second, I have absolutely nothing to do with this house. Without looking back at the expensive gifts lying on the table and floor, Philip turned on his heel. He stomped over the crunching glass, marching straight out the iron gate. He ran like a man escaping the plague, threw open his car door, and jumped into the driver's seat. The engine roared to life. The Audi reversed violently out of the alley, tires screeching against the tarmac, and sped off into the distance, leaving only a cloud of gray exhaust in the crisp Christmas air. In the living room, Chloe slid down the arm of the sofa and collapsed onto the floor, her radiant red silk dress now stained and filthy. She buried her face in her hands and wailed pathetically. It was the sound of a dream of wealth, shattering into 100 pieces. Dawn slumped down next to her daughter. Her hair was messy, her eyes vacant, staring blankly into nothing. She couldn't cry. She just panted heavily, as if her life force had been drained. Her cunning, calculating brain had overloaded, unable to process the brutal reality. The wage slave she despised, the tool she used for her vanity project, was the very person who held the power of life and death over her golden son-in-law's career. With a flick of her wrist, that stepdaughter had demolished the bright future she had painstakingly constructed. A long moment later, Dawn finally moved. She blinked rapidly, swallowing hard to moisten her dry throat. She awkwardly scrambled up, her knee banging against the glass table with a loud thud, but she didn't seem to feel the pain. She stumbled forward, reaching out her bony hands to grab my coat. I calmly stepped back, The heel of my boot crunched on the broken glass. Dawn's hands grasped at empty air, then dropped awkwardly to her sides. She forced a smile, the most twisted, crumpled, and pathetic smile I had ever seen. Hannah! Hannah! Love! Her voice shook, desperately trying to summon the fake sweetness she had used on the phone yesterday. I'm getting old. I was confused. I spoke without thinking earlier. And Chloe, she's young and foolish. She's impulsive and doesn't know how the world works. You're the older sister. You can't hold a grudge over a child's words. I kept my arms crossed, saying nothing, just watching her play out the final act of the sacrificing mother. You're a CEO, Dawn lowered her voice, rubbing her hands together in supplication. Just give Philip a ring, love. Tell him to come back. This franchise thing, be the bigger person and approve it for him. If he marries, Chloe, he'll be your brother-in-law. We're all family, keeping the wealth inside the house. Let him pay for his sister's wedding. If he cancels the engagement, now the whole town will laugh in our faces. Even now, when every mask had been ripped away, the only thing this woman cared about was the wedding, her daughter's reputation, and the financial benefit of being tied to a rich man. Not a single word of apology for the years I spent eating instant noodles in damp basements. No remorse for the freezing Christmas Eve when I was thrown out. Her pleading was just a despicable bargain to salvage her last bit of profit. Chloe looked up from the floor, her face drenched in tears. The look in her eyes was groveling, a complete 180 from the arrogant sneer when she told me to stay. In the kitchen, less than an hour ago. Hannah, please help me. If Philip leaves me, what am I going to do? Chloe sobbed. I looked at the two of them. A cold wave of pity rose in my chest. Seeking revenge against the weak and short-sighted actually offered no sense of achievement. It only made me realize I had traveled too far, left this swamp too long ago to feel any connection to them anymore. I slowly dropped my arms to my sides. The play is over. My voice was flat and decisive, like a blade severing the final thread. If you're not tired, I am. I've seen enough. Do not ever contact me to beg or scrounge. The game of happy families ends here. Dawn's face turned deathly pale. Her lips trembled. She wanted to scream and curse at me out of habit, but looking at my cold, untouchable demeanor, she bit her lip, swallowing her rage. I turned, ready to walk out. But just then, a dark shadow collapsed onto the floor from the corner of the room. The man who had spent his life shrinking into a shell of cowardice, content to be a mute ghost in his own home, was now kneeling on the tiled floor. His thin hands, covered in blue veins, buried his face. His racking sobs were broken, desolate, and entirely too late. Hannah, Hannah, Dad was wrong. He cried like a child stripped of a precious toy, though the truth was he had thrown it in the bin himself years ago. 8 years ago I didn't stop them. I let you walk out into the snow. I'm a bastard. I don't deserve to be a father. His disjointed apologies tumbled out between choked sobs. All the guilt he had, buried for 8 years, shattered, pouring out uncontrollably. He looked up at me, with red, tear-filled eyes, pleading for forgiveness, desperate for a hug from his flesh and blood. He shuffled on his knees across the floor toward me, his trembling hands, reaching out to grab my legs. I stood still. I didn't step back, but I didn't reach out to help him up, either. Looking at the tears streaming down his weathered face and his graying hair, I thought I would feel heartbreak. I thought I would feel pity. After all, the man kneeling on the floor was the one who gave me life. But strangely, my chest remained completely still. My heart felt like a lake that had frozen over through too many harsh winters. Not a single ripple could disturb it now. Was this father's love for me real? Perhaps. But it was too weak, too pathetic. He lacked the courage to provide a meal, a roof, or a place in the world when I needed him most. His cowardice was the deepest knife wound to an 8-year-old's trust. And now, these tears of remorse were just a way to relieve his own guilty conscience. They brought me no warmth, no compensation. A broken mirror, no matter how carefully glued back together, will always show the cracks. I reached into the inner pocket of my coat. My fingers touched the rough texture of paper. Slowly I pulled it out. It was a 20 pounds note. The paper was discolored, By time, the edges frayed. The web of creases was permanently etched into it, no matter how many times I had tried to flatten it. For 8 years, it had sat in the bottom of my purse. It wasn't a lucky charm, it was a sharp anchor pinning my mind to that freezing Christmas Eve, reminding me never to go soft, never to forget how I had been thrown away. I held the note loosely, stepping past my weeping father, and walked straight toward the wooden mantelpiece against the far wall. There, next to some wilting flowers, was a framed black and white photograph of my late mother. She smiled, gently in the photo, her quiet eyes watching the absurd hypocrisy of this house. I reached out and gently placed the 20-pound note on the glass surface of the mantelpiece. The rustle of the paper was incredibly soft, but in that deathly, quiet room, it sounded piercing. I took a step back and turned to look Thomas directly in the eye. "I'm giving this 20 quid back to you." My voice was even, holding no boiling hatred, no resentment, just a clear, weightless declaration of an ending. "I'm returning the freezing Christmas Eve of that year, and I'm returning your silence when they threw my bags out into the snow." I took a deep breath, filling my lungs with the cold morning air. Spilled water cannot be gathered back up. From this moment on, my debt to this house is paid in full. I didn't wait for him to react. I didn't even bother to glance back at Dawn and Chloe cowering by the sofa. I turned on my heel. My steady steps crushed the dust of time, crunching over the shards of broken glass, and walked straight out, the open green iron gate. Stepping over the threshold, the sky outside seemed to brighten. The winter breeze blew past, carrying the crisp, pure chill of Christmas morning, sweeping away the foul, musty stench of the petty calculations inside that house. Down the road, a few neighborhood kids in bright red coats were chasing each other. Their clear laughter echoed, blending with the crunch of frost beneath my boots. I took a deep breath and strolled down the familiar street. My destination was the winding alleyway holding the mossy-roofed terraced house. There, a pot of beef stew was simmering on the hob, waiting for me to come home. For 8 years, my chest had been weighed down by an invisible boulder. A boulder named humiliation, named familial betrayal. I used to think I had to be tough, make loads of money, and stand at the top just so I could return one day and crush their arrogance, making them pay for that snowy night. But right now, having witnessed the pathetic collapse of their theatrical facade, having seen the delayed tears of a cowardly father, the boulder inside me simply crumbled into dust and vanished into the ether. There was no overwhelming, gloating, no glorious triumph, just a profound, absolute liberation. I turned into the familiar alley. The mossy brick walls, the winter berries, blooming by a neighbor's porch, the sound of a Christmas choir playing on a Klexus. Telly. My boots stepped onto the damp earth as I pushed open the faded wooden gate. Auntie Sarah's small yard smelled of wood smoke and roasting meat. In the sedum of wood smoke and roasting meat kitchen, Auntie Sarah was stirring the rich, simmering beef stew with a large, wooden spoon. Uncle Harry was carefully polishing a couple of wine glasses for Xn's dinner. Hearing my footsteps, the 2 Labradors bounded out, tails wagging frantically as they wound around my legs. Auntie Sarah looked up, surprised to see me back so much earlier than planned. A flash of understanding crossed her eyes, quickly scanning my calm face. With the blank, intuition of a hard-working woman, she probably guessed the storm that had just occurred behind that green iron gate. But she didn't ask. She didn't pry with questions like, "What did they say?" Or "Did they bully you?" She simply tapped the wooden spoon against the pot, wiped her hands on her apron, and pulled a chair out from the dining table. "You're back then," her earthy voice carried through the steam. "Come and eat. Love. The stew is perfectly tender. You must be starving." Just one normal sentence, devoid of any grand declarations, but it made my eyes suddenly burn. I took off my trench coat, draped it over the chair, rolled up my sleeves, and sat down. Uncle Harry hurried over with the plates, setting everything out neatly. "Auntie." Sarah ladled a massive portion of stew onto my plate, ensuring I got the softest cuts of beef and the thickest gravy. "Eat it while it's hot, lass. You were out early without breakfast." I lifted my fork. The steam hit my face in a warm wave. I took a bite. The rich, hearty flavor of the beef and ale slipped down my throat, and the warmth immediately spread from my stomach to my chest, reaching all the way to my W. freezing fingertips. My vision blurred. A single heavy tear rolled down my cheek and fell onto the back of my hand. I paused. It had been a very long time since I cried. Through all the years of grinding in London, even when squeezed by ruthless partners, even when lying, alone in a cramped flat sick with a fever, I had never shed a tear. But now, in this small kitchen, smelling of wood smoke and sitting down to a humble meal with the people who loved me unconditionally, I cried. They weren't tears of bitterness or grievance. They were tears of peace. The relief of an exhausted traveler who had finally found her true sanctuary. Seeing me cry silently, Auntie Sarah didn't fuss or panic. She grabbed a clean tea towel from the rack and tossed it lightly into my lap. "Oh, for heaven's sake! You're a grown woman, a big-shot CEO in London, and you're crying over a bowl of stew like a toddler," she scolded affectionately, though her own eyes were red. She put another piece of beef on my plate and clicked her tongue. "Just eat up. Have a good cry to lighten the load, and then throw it all away. From now on, you don't have to look at anyone's face to live. My girl." I laughed through my tears, using the towel to wipe my cheeks. "I will. The stew is brilliant, Auntie." That Christmas dinner passed with roaring laughter, Uncle Harry sipping his ale, and the telly playing a Christmas special in the background. The gaping hole in my soul, dug out by that toxic family, had been completely filled by Auntie Sarah's beef stew. That afternoon, my phone buzzed incessantly on the table. The screen flashed. With dozens of missed calls from unknown numbers, from Thomas and from Chloe, I didn't need to answer to guess what they were saying. It was surely a chorus of crying, begging, and apologies, hoping to salvage the illusion of the franchise contract I had ripped to shreds. I didn't turn the phone off, nor did I sigh. My finger glided over the screen, coldly and decisively hitting block on every single one of those numbers. Blocked on all apps, all platforms. A simple physical action to officially close a chapter filled with hypocritical words. A few days later, through the gossip of relatives who visited Auntie Sarah for Boxing Day, I learned of the fallout at the house on the main street. Philip had canceled the wedding on Christmas morning, uncaring of any reputation. He caused a massive scene at the local pub, screaming that Chloe's family were con artists who set up a fake facade to bleed him dry. When the family were con artists, truth came out. Chloe became the laughingstock of the entire town. The title of future director's wife was stripped away, replaced by the mocking stares of the neighbors. Dawn, who usually loved bragging in the streets, faked an illness and locked her doors, not daring to show her face for the rest of the holidays. Her dream of wealth shattered, and the disgrace of abandoning her stepdaughter brought shame upon her own head. She had no face left to look at anyone. As for my father, Thomas, he just shuffled around like a soulless ghost. I heard that whenever he set the dinner table, he always put out an extra plate and fork at the corner. If anyone accidentally mentioned my name, he would quietly turn away and wipe his tears, drowning in the torment of his remaining days. Karma always exacts its price. Hearing this, I simply nodded and poured more tea for the guests. No gloating, no concern, no pity. Their lives, from the moment I placed that 20 pounds note on the mantelpiece, had been completely erased from my orbit. In the new year, I packed my light suitcase and took the train back to London. The rhythm of the corporate world pulled me back into its frantic spin. Pure brew. Botanicals expanded with 3 new branches in the north. Revenue grew steadily, and I was busy from dawn till dusk. Yet my mind was more relaxed and grounded than ever before. No more nightmares about the freezing Christmas Eve. No more torment over a distorted concept of family. On a day in mid-May, as the first summer sun began to shine, I drove my newly bought Range Rover up the M1, turning off at the Old Town intersection. I didn't stop on the main street, but drove straight into the narrow alley, parking in front of Auntie Sarah's gate. Auntie, Sarah, and Uncle Harry had finished packing their bulky bags and were blading their bulky bags and were fursidened, waiting on the porch. I had bought a cozy, compact flat on the same floor as my own penthouse to bring my aunt and uncle to London for their retirement. Good Lord, Hannah, why buy a house? Such a waste of money. We're just coming down for a week's holiday. We can't stay there forever, Auntie Sarah grumbled, out of habit as she hauled a bag toward the boot. I took the bag from her, smiling as I shut the boot. The money I make is to take care of the people who truly love me. You and Uncle Harry move in. And on the weekends, I'll pop over for free meals so I don't have to spend money at restaurants. The car rolled out of the town, leaving behind the budding trees, leaving behind a youth full of scars. That evening, in a brightly lit flat on the 25th floor in London, I cooked dinner myself. The pressure cooker hissed steadily on the induction hob. The familiar, rich smell of beef stew filled the living room. Auntie Sarah sat on the soft sofa, picking the last of the fresh herbs. Uncle Harry leisurely sipped a cup of tea, watching the news on the massive flat-screen telly. The down-to-earth laughter, the clatter of cutlery, it created a sound that soothed all the exhaustion of a long workday. I brought the steaming bowl of stew to the center of the table, pulled out a wooden chair, and sat down next to them, looking at the steam rising from the perfect meal, looking at the genuine smiles wrinkling the corners of my aunt and Uncle's eyes. I lifted my small teacup and clinked it against Uncle Harry's glass. The crisp clink rang out. The corners of my mouth curled into the brightest, freest, and most fulfilled smile. Family, at the end of the day, is never determined by the blood in your veins or a lifeless piece of paper on a birth certificate. It is simply a sanctuary, a place where someone is always ready to turn on a warm light and save you a hot bowl of stew whenever you come home.